Björk, I'm sure it's not your first time, nor will it be your last time, but welcome to Six Music on this lovely Thursday morning. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Whereabouts in the world are you right now?
I am in Iceland.
Is that where you've been for a while, or are you just stopping off?
I've actually been here more than ever, probably last 3 years. And then through the whole pandemic, I was here for like 2 years without even opening up my suitcase, so that was really good.
Yeah, and what does Iceland mean to you, like in terms of it being home? Like if you was to describe your Iceland through your eyes, what would that look like to you?
Obviously, it's home to me emotionally when it comes to, I still have friends since childhood, and my family's really big, and they all live really close to me. I can walk to a lot of these houses for a cup of tea. Then I do especially appreciate, as I've gotten older, that it is, if you look at Iceland on Google Maps, the proportions between nature and cities is like really low. I think it's the same size as England without Wales and Scotland, but it has 360,000 people.
Wow.
And most of it is raw nature. So I do love that.
We wanted to get you on because next week your 10th studio album is out, Fossora, and like you said, being back home for such a long time, for the first time during the pandemic, and so many people were in the exact same situation wherever their homes may be. But I wanted to, I guess, we'll start to delve into the album a bit more, but I wanted to ask whether during that time you rediscovered anything about yourself away from music, or was there anything else that you found a source of inspiration?
Yeah, I think most of all, for me, it just happened to be where I was in my life that there were a container on its way across the Atlantic with the other half of my belongings, and now they're all here in Iceland for the first time since I was a teenager, where everything I own is in one place. So that was really healing for me. And then of course the pandemic came, and that sort of exaggerated that feeling times 10, that it was this kind of like, this is where I'm from, and everything I'm made of is here, and I feel very solid, and everybody I love are just here. And if I should answer this question on a more sort of sonic level, I do call this album my sort of mushroom album. And the reason why it is because my last album was very much, I called it my sci-fi island in the clouds. And the reason why I called it that is because it was like a lot of flutes, and we produced it together, me and Arka, and we had a lot of synthesizers that sounded like air, and it was element air, creating a paradise with mutant birds and flutes, but there was no bass or bottom end, or very little sort of bass drums in it. But on this album, it's just like 6 bass clarinets and gabba beats dug down into the soil. So when I call it my mushroom album, that's sort of what I'm actually just trying to describe a sound, if that makes any sense. It's like you got your feet barefoot into the soil. You're there with all your friends and family, or everybody you love, and it's like a happy album, but it's very earthy. I'm happy with what I got, sort of album.
Yeah, sure, your rootsy moment. And I guess when some people often think of like the word mushroom, other experiences may come to mind, but this is truly kind of returning back to nature. So then building those sonics, then you have that initial feeling of being home, you have that, all your belongings coming to join you as well, and just, I guess, returning to a different state of you, or one that was prior. But then how do you build the sonics from then? Did you say we're going to need these clarinets, or we're going to need these gabba beats, or did they present themselves to you?
Well, for me it always starts like a feeling. The first couple of years I'm just more sort of writing just whatever I feel. I'm not being like analytical or like I haven't got like a plan. Just trying to be really like let my subconscious just roam and just do whatever I want. And then once I usually sort of have like a moment where, and try not to listen to it too much. And then I always have a moment where I sort of sit down and try to listen to it all back to back. and sort of pretend I didn't make it and go, oh, okay, it's this kind of album. Okay. And then I sort of start work on it more as the sort of arranger, sort of producer, I guess. I sort of program most of my beats, the patterns on this album. Then the sort of sound design of them is, I will sometimes call in some help.
Yeah, and a moment that maybe someone else may have come in and added to that was on OVL with El Guincho. For those that don't know, he's worked with the likes of Rosalia and Losing the Yakuza. But it wasn't the first time you've worked with him. It's a sort of 10-year gap and then reuniting.
Yes, he came. I listened so much to an album he released. I think it was 2009 or 10 when I was in Puerto Rico. And then I asked him to come to Brooklyn and help me finish the beats. Yeah, he was just so wonderful to work with. And we sort of kept in touch since then. Every time I go to Spain, I kind of text him and we end up hanging out or DJing in hotel rooms for each other or something stupid. And yeah, he's just a wonderful musical person.
Brilliant. Well, let's hear that track.
I have stars in a shell.
OVL on BBC Radio 6 Music. I'm down the line with Björk right now. We're talking about her album Fossora, which is coming out next week. Also on that track are a band from Iceland called Side Project. How did that sort of union come together, and was it important for you to have them on to kind of rep Iceland as well?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, for sure I want to rep Iceland, but for me it's sort of more about if they're good musician. And we were sort of actually DJing this record shop downtown in Reykjavik that, of course, all record shops are borderline sort of bankrupt like everywhere else. And we were sort of doing a DJ gig where we would ask people to come and voluntarily play live or DJ with us. And they came a couple of times, and I just think I think so highly of them. Both as a live act and also as producers, and they're actually part of a record label called Postdreifing here in Iceland, and they've sort of been hanging out. We've been sort of helping each other with stuff. I guess in Iceland it's very sort of, most things like that are based on sort of just voluntary work. Yeah. Like everybody just sort of help each other out,
Yeah, musical community. And I guess your finger is so on the pulse. Like, I still remember hearing Serpent with Feet for the first time and hearing the story of how you guys had met each other, and the sort of early days of you supporting him and being, I guess, of a mentor. Do you remember what it was about an artist like Serpent with Feet that made you feel excited?
Yeah, I heard For Ethos. I was just so blown away. And then my best friend at the time signed him. We just became really good buddies in New York. We were sort of going to concerts like a lot. It's kind of good to have a concert buddy when you're in a city you don't know that well. Yeah, and we kept in touch since. He actually sang with me live the remix he did of Blissing Me, both in New York and also in LA and San Francisco this January.
Wow.
Yeah, he just continued. I'm just really proud of him, and I just think he's very brave in what he does. He's kind of has the courage to be different and just to protect his identity.
Baby.
So Serpent with Feet is on the album, as are your son and daughter as well. How did that come about? Was it an organic thing, like you guys in lockdown making music together, or was it part of the thread of the album?
Yeah, it's totally what you just said.
The first bit?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, it was totally just hanging out a lot in lockdown, and it would have been odd not to invite them somehow. But I think also looking back at it, something that maybe I wasn't so conscious of, but I think I'm starting to understand it a bit better now, that, they're both grown-ups now. This is the first time where they're both grown-ups. And, my daughter's turning 20 next week. So I feel like if I would have asked them to do it earlier, I'm not so sure they would have been old enough to know what comes with it, because singing on your parents' work or working in your parents' work, there's a lot of luggage that comes with that psychologically. I think also all kind of strangers coming up to you, asking you all kind of questions, and I think they both know that now, and they had a chance to say no, like I feel uncomfortable about all that. I'm very grateful that they both said yes. So, and also my son is singing on the song about my mom, which I think is very appropriate, and he sort of did it as a present to her. They were really close, so it just all feels really right.
Björk's down the line on Six Music, and we played you Ancestress off the album Fossora. So the album is out on the 30th of September. And I love that you spoke so nicely before about the fact that your son features on that record, and it's for your mother as well. Because I feel like you've always bared yourself on your music and been vulnerable. But was talking about your mom and writing songs about your mom, was that another layer of vulnerability for you?
Yes, very much so. When I was writing the songs, I did think for the first year or two that maybe I would release them separately, like in a more sort of protected environment. As time went by, I felt more and more that they should be part of this whole thing, because if this is a documentation of 4 years in my life, that's just life, right? You have a lot of ups and you have downs, and you just have to deal with both good and bad. So it felt in that way that it was the right home for these songs. When I released them as a video online, I'm going to try to sort of present them as something sort of slightly separate, or something that's a little bit different from the rest of the album, hopefully with respect to my mother. As a singer-songwriter, I've been writing diaries since I was a teenager, and I'm really inspired by diarists like Anna Snin, who people are now like noticing that she was, perhaps the best female diarist of the 20th century. And one of the most remarkable things she did was to document her life from the age of 11 till 77. So you get all the stages of womanhood. And I've always been really inspired by her diaries. I think I'm more inspired than I thought I was by the sort of consistency of that. I've sort of been calling it the democracy of age groups, that it's not one age group deserves more documentation than another one. That if when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's all same, they all deserve documentation. So from that sort of point of view, I decided, oh yes, I am going to include the songs about my mother in there, because that's part of every human, is to say farewell to a parent. It's actually like a bigger event in our lives than I realized. Till you don't realize it till it happens to you.
Nature wrote
I had some questions in from some listeners, so we picked two of them. The first one from one of our listeners, Paul. He wanted to ask that, is there another country other than Iceland that you feel like has a big influence on you, or that has sort of influenced and inspired you?
Yeah, a lot of countries. I feel quite global as well, which is probably a contradiction. I always have to give a shout out to the UK, because musically you guys brought me up in many ways, like not only Kate Bush and Brian Eno, but also just many of my first trips as a teenager were to the UK. But I mean, there's a lot of countries. I've noticed that I've been unusually much in Japan. I've probably been more in Japan than most European countries. I do think one of the reasons is that it's like a northern culture, and I feel like a southern culture, like Mediterranean, like as in, Italy, Spain, France, UK, USA culture has been documented a lot. Northern culture, like, Finland, Siberia, northern Japan, Iceland, Greenland, Inuit, Sami people. This is a group of people that I feel really strongly a part of, and I feel we share, like, our relationship with nature is different. It's definitely not wearing a thong on the beach. It's we have just as much passion, but it's just dug deeper down. And there is some, like, Russian folk music and Japanese folk music that is kind of similar to some Icelandic folk music. So we could probably do like 10 episodes on that.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there.
I like it. Yeah, we can come back to that one. But I like what you said as well, because I guess it's a side of the world that if you come from a very Western world, you don't get to hear much of the traditions and the stories and the folklores and from that side of the world. So the fact that you've been back there, consistently, I found that really interesting. And we had another question from Nick Fleetwood in Wimbledon. Nick's gone in. He said, in terms of your creative process, which tune have you enjoyed the process of the most? And on the flip side of that, which have you least enjoyed?
Wow. This is such a good question that I
wish I wrote it. It was Nick.
I think it probably took longest for me to do Ancestress. It wasn't that it was not enjoyable. It was just a really tricky riddle to solve. I just had to put so many things in it, and then I actually took majority of them back out because it had to be simple. It had to be complex, being, my mother's funeral, and it had to have some sort of, I wanted to be the grandest of all grand or whatever, but it also had to be the most humble of all humble. So it was a very strange mix. So that's actually one of the first songs I started working on this album, and actually one of the last ones I finished. And then songs that was most enjoyable, I don't know, sometimes I love math numbers because I'm a bit of a math nerd from school. So I think songs like Atopos, where you have to sit down and roll up your sleeves and work out all the math with all the crazy time signatures, and all the bass drums come on like insane spots that they're not supposed to happen. And I do love a math number myself, I have to say. Sorry. Yeah.
I read online that you painstakingly, edited in the beats into the time signature. So it was I guess that was a labour of love, that record. But I love that you're so open, online with your process in terms of, yes, we can do an amazing interview. I can just as easily go on your Instagram and read about all the meanings of the songs, and the lyrics are there, and I can find out which creative that you've worked with, and that continues with your podcast as well. That's coming out sort of in real time, looking back at your past work, and I find it inspiring. And I don't make music, so I can only imagine the music makers that are listening to your work and listen to your podcast, how much they will go away and take from it. So I just firstly wanted to say a massive thank you for that, and congratulations on your 10th album. I'm sure every time is a different time and a different experience, but if you could put it into one word, what it feels to have this album coming out into the world, what would you say?
I'm just actually really grateful. I was thinking, wait a minute, I'm probably become jaded or something. It's not going to feel that special when the album comes out. But now, with the build-up coming up to it, it does feel really like a celebration, and also not just me, but all the people who worked on it. Like, everybody worked super hard, both all the musicians and the technicians and the visual people, and also the people from my record company, Derek Burkitt and everyone. So I think it's sort of like a collective just harvest time, I guess. And that's sort of why we're all doing it, why we're all working so hard, right? Is that sort of feeling of release or relief and release. Yes.
Thank you so much, Björk. We're going to end our conversation on Atopos. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.